and welcome to episode 14 of the instruction booklet. My name's Jeremy. I'm one of your two hosts, and I'm joined always by my co-host, a man who definitely believes that The Lion King is Hamlet. That would be my co-host, Michael. Michael, how's it going?
Yeah, I mean, I think the parallels are strong enough that I'm personally convinced. You know, we have a mutual friend, of course, who's not quite so convinced that The Lion King is Hamlet. I think the more amusing connection to draw from that is the fact that The Lion King 1.5, which I think sucks, by the way, is actually an adaptation of Tom Stoppard's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, which is a interesting postmodernist kind of absurdist take on Hamlet from the perspective of two side characters who basically show up in one scene and then disappear.
Yeah. I had to look that up because I didn't exactly know, but see, I'm just convinced about the whole Kimba the White Lion thing.
Yeah, that's another whole bag of worms, barrel of worms, bag of monkeys. I don't know. Or,
you know, in reference to some of the things we'll talk about, giant thing that vomits worms.
Yes.
So yeah. I guess as always, as we start things off, Michael, what you been reading, watching? What kind of media have you been ingesting lately that has been fun and exciting?
Yeah, well, so the big one that I'm sure we'll end up talking about today is since our last episode, Shadow of the Erdtree. Released and has been consumed by the community at large. You're still in the process of consuming. I have completed.
Yep.
So if you're tuning in and listening to us and you have not finished Shadow of the Erdtree, I am going to be forced to keep it spoiler free as far as the main kind of ending of the DLC. But Shadow of the Erdtree has been the big one. The Boys season 4 is currently ongoing. Which I think is wonderful. I'm really enjoying this season.
I haven't started it yet. It's on my list.
It's really good. Obviously there's some naysayers in the media who are concerned that the show has gone woke, because I think they're finally understanding that the show is and has always been much more of a critique of the far right and conservative culture in the US than it has been of liberalism.
What? No.
Yeah, it very much reminds me of how, like a decade ago, some conservatives were discovering for the first time ever that Rage Against the Machine are hardcore leftists.
Yeah, I remember that. That got me so good.
Yeah, that was very funny, and there's similar vibes, about this. Rest assured, if you value my opinion, if we have the same taste in things, that I think season 4 has been wonderful so far.
Looking forward to
it. Remains to be seen if they stick the landing. Likewise, The Bear, season 3 just fully came out.
Yep, we've watched the first 3 episodes.
I've only watched the first episode so far.
Nothing like watching a really stressful show.
Yeah, and I've heard this season in particular has been stressful because apparently it's moving very slow and some people are kind of annoyed. Other than that, I've just been playing D&D. I've got my ongoing group that's playing again this summer. We're starting up kind of a new leg of this ongoing campaign where I'm running the pre-written adventure that actually came with last year's Planescape books for
nice.
5e. Yeah, it's very exciting. As somebody who's played at least the first part of Planescape Torment, it's very cool for me seeing all of the characters and the places that are in that game actually kind of like referenced in an official D&D book. I mean, they have been in the past as well, but I suppose I'm a little bit younger of somebody in this hobby. So
right. Nothing wrong with that.
What about you? What have you been engaging with lately?
Well, yeah, I still am playing Shadow of the Erdtree right now. I just made it to the final zone right before we started recording. I've been enjoying it a lot. It's really been great. We'll talk about just seeing some of the progressions has been wonderful. I've been reading. I was trying to read as quickly as I could the Dark Souls Beyond the Grave Volume 2. I'd gotten it for Christmas and just never got around to like starting it. And then this came up and I was like, oh, I need to start reading that. I chewed through a lot of stuff recently. I watched the entire first season and as much episodes are out of My Adventures of Superman. And that show has been really good.
Really good.
Like, I've never been much of a Superman person. He just never really like appealed to me, but a friend of mine like recommended the story arc, so I read through it and was like, oh man, this is really good. And then you were talking about this, and so I just had some free time, so I sat down to watch it, and I was like, okay, the portrayal of Clark Kent / Superman in this has been really refreshing.
Yeah.
Just as a whole, the show is really refreshing because I'm kind of just like tired of like dark, like gritty superhero shows.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because My Adventures with Superman kind of seems to be going the same route that the Batman TV show just called The Batman did, which is to say that they're remixing a lot of his villains and his mythology in a way that I think works really well for the kind of show that it is.
Oh yeah, it has left turned me so many times as a whole, just like, and where currently is at in the second season has been very intriguing.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I'm hopeful not to go down this rabbit hole too much, but I might be the only person in the world genuinely, seriously excited for James Gunn's Superman adaptation.
I think he's got a good handle on like superhero stuff. So
he does, and I've heard early rumors suggest that he seems to be taking Kingdom Come as a influence.
Okay.
Insofar as I've heard that there's some discussion of Superman, like, you know, in Kingdom Come, how Superman is like a well-established superhero and he has to deal with kind of the appearance of the new like anti-hero who will kill people, you know, like with Mangog.
Oh yeah, with Magog. Yeah.
Or Magog, that's right, not Mangog. That's a Marvel character.
Yeah.
I've heard some people suggest that the new Superman film kind of seems to be doing the opposite, where it's going to say like a young Superman is kind of showing up into a world in which there are a lot of these already gritty, like morally gray superheroes active. And so it's kind of going to be doing a reverse Kingdom Come style thing. That's what I've heard some people suggest.
Yeah, and I know he commented that he really liked My Adventures with Superman and wanted them to keep going. So, and then the trailer just dropped for the new Batman animated series.
Oh yeah, Caped Crusader.
Yeah, and it looks really good. Bruce Timm does no wrong. It's just going to be really weird without Kevin Conroy voicing Batman.
Yeah.
So, and then what else have I been? Watched a lot of anime. I've watched all of Kaiju number 8, and Demon Slayer. Go Go Loser Ranger has been really hilariously good because it's The Boys-esque, but with Power Rangers.
That's cool.
So everybody's just like shades of shitty. I picked up. I guess this could like, because we could kind of talk a little bit about some gaming news as well. You know, the big announcement for Summer Games Fest is Marvel vs. Capcom has been released, and we're getting a release of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 with rollback netcode.
Good. I'm very excited.
Yeah, I went and picked up a game for a friend as a gift, and while I was there, they had a physical copy of the Capcom Fighting Collection, which is got all 4 Darkstalkers games, and so I bought a physical copy. I have it on Steam, but I want a physical version so they can never take it away from me.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'm going to do with this MVC collection is I'll probably buy it on Steam, and then I'll probably buy a physical version for my Switch just so I can have it.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So yeah, and to kind of signal to Capcom and, you know, Disney, like, hey, can you give us another one?
Yeah.
Just maybe not as bad as Infinite.
Yeah. Just give us MVC4 and give us X-Men. Put the X-Men in.
And yeah, so I picked that up. So I played that for a little bit, and I haven't bought it yet. It's currently in my cart. I want to get Dave the Diver because of the Godzilla DLC.
It's so good. It's so good.
Yeah, and I've been playing this silly game on my phone that I guess shout out to one of our mutual friends, Griffin, on our Discord server. He started playing this game called Cards, the Universe, and Everything, and he started by posting.
I saw that.
So I started playing it, and it's just like dumb little like free to play gotcha game, and you know I've got like a deck of nothing but like nebulas and like just the weirdest stuff. It's just like in fact their YouTube channel recommends you go check out a YouTube channel called Games for Dads. I'm just like, great, I'm playing a dad game. So I've been doing that, and oh right, and all of last month I played Kingsfield, the Japanese release on Duck Station, which I've gotten really into this PS1 emulator because I never owned a PlayStation, and it's been kind of neat. So I downloaded that, even though there was the Spyro Remaster Collection, I actually downloaded the original Spyro the Dragon so I could play it in like its native format. Man, playing games at 20 frames per second is terrible.
Yeah, that sounds rough.
So
I can barely even stand to go back to Bloodborne and play in 30 frames per second.
yeah, I had to finagle with Duck Station, but I was able to like produce like a stable frame rate and move things. It's really weird when you try and overclock this not real PS1. It starts doing weird things with the polygons. Like when I was playing Kingsfield, the floors would try and separate with the polygons. So oh, and I guess you've probably been as well. This is not like, you know, reading or watching, but I've been listening the hell out of American Motorsports by Bill Murray.
Oh yeah, I've been enjoying that.
Yeah. So yeah. All right. Well, so today's episode is one that we've always had as like a break glass in case of emergency. So we finally decided to bust it out, and we're doing a Souls episode. But we're kind of doing it with a little bit of an added bonus, is that we're going to talk a little bit about the company who makes the Souls games, From Software, as well as the head designer, Hidetaka Miyazaki. So today's going to be kind of a really fun episode. We don't really have much in terms of notes because we're both pretty big Souls fans.
Yep.
So this episode might run a little long. Hopefully you enjoy the two of us rambling about Souls games. So yeah, I guess to start off real brief is the company From Software that produced these games. They were originally founded in November 1st of 1986. So I'm actually like a few months older than From Software. Originally, they were a business software company, like designing like Word and Excel-esque programs, which is kind of hilarious. And they did this from 1986 all the way to 1994. They were just making business application software. And I really can't find a whole lot about that, like even looking into it. And when the Sony initially launched its PlayStation, they decided that they wanted to venture into the development market and release their very first game called Kingsfield. This is not to be confused with... So there are 4 Kingsfield games. It's kind of like how Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3 for the US is not actually Final Fantasy. You know, the numbers don't line up in Japan because of how releases worked at the time. So the first Kingsfield was a Japanese exclusive only, and that was the one that I spent an entire like month playing. And it was like kind of their first foray into games. After that, they went in to make the other series that made them like very famous at the time, was a 3D mech simulation game called Armored Core.
Yep.
Man, some jank controls, which I will go into.
I remember trying to play one of the Armored Cores. I don't remember specifically which one it was, but as a kid, I remember renting it from a Blockbuster and taking it home and playing it, and being just so befuddled by how difficult and jank the controls were that I basically never got past the first level. And I remember being disappointed. I don't remember which game it was, but that's my first experience, I think, with a FromSoft game. So
yeah. So there's this modern convenience that I don't think a lot of us like realize until you actually have to go backwards, is dual analog is like the best thing ever. So prior to dual analog, and this was how in Kingsfield and earlier Armored Core games worked, you had a joystick or you had a directional pad. So, like, you know, mentally you would think up, down, left, right on the D-pad would have your character like move in those directions, right? In Kingsfield, forward and backwards on the D-pad move your characters forward and backwards. Left and right on your D-pad turns your character left and right. To move left and right in a strafing, you have to push L1 and R1. To look up and down, you have to push L1, L2, R2.
I'm already getting confused.
Yes. So you have to use shoulder buttons to strafe and look up and down, and you have to use your D-pad to move back and forth and look left and right.
Huh.
So when I booted up Kingsfield 1, I was like, what is this nonsense?
Wouldn't it make more sense to have the strafing be on the D-pad with the forward and backward motion and have the shoulder buttons all just be
You would
looking?
think.
Yeah.
So I remapped everything to actually map to dual analog.
Yeah.
Because I was not going to put up with that. So for anybody listening to this that thinks that I'm not playing, I played this game in its purest form, I dare you to go and play this game with those controls and just get back with me.
Yeah.
You know, you can happily, you know, send us an email at instructionbooklet87@gmail.com and say I was wrong.
Yeah. Fake gamer alert.
Yeah. And that's also how the original Armored Core games worked, is you used the shoulder buttons to move your reticle to shoot things. And going back and watching people play it at like an insane level and knowing that that's what they're doing, I'm just like befuddled.
Yeah. I guess you really have to develop muscle memory for it to come intuitively.
Yeah. During from like 97 to 2010, FromSoft released like a ton of games. You know, they made more sequels to Armored Core. They had a game called Frame Grid on the Sega Dreamcast. They did a game called Eternal Ring, which I remember seeing advertisements for. They worked on Tenchu 3. And somewhere in the midst of all of this, they made this game in 1998, which I told Michael about, and is called Shadow Tower. And I only had to take this note because of, and I wanted to like make this like fun little side mention about it, because it was a game that didn't use experience points. Instead, you had to kill creatures that were non-respawnable to raise fixed stats. Like, you scammed over it, right?
Yeah.
It's a very bizarre game.
Yeah. I kind of like that idea. You know, like as a dungeon master who's admittedly more of a fan of milestone leveling than experience points, I kind of have grown to like that more intentional progression. You know, like we'll talk about it probably later, but one of my favorite Souls experiences, if this even counts as a Souls game, is Sekiro, because I really like that it does not have progression the same way a lot of the other games do.
Yeah.
And that kind of means that the challenge and the difficulty can be more specifically tailored around what the developers understand the player's capabilities to be at that point in the game.
Right.
So I have to imagine that on some level with Shadow Tower. Now, I could be giving them too much credit. I haven't played the game. It's possible that it's a jank mess, unlike I'm trying to make it sound like, it's some kind of, artistically designed experience or whatever. But I do like the idea of having more fixed progression milestones based around, I don't know.
We can just always set you up on Duck Station and let you try it.
That's true. Maybe that can be the sequel to your Kingsfield playthrough, is my Shadow Tower
You
playthrough.
played Shadow Tower.
Yeah.
So during the time period up till 2007, 2006 actually. FromSoft's been making a ton of like interesting like games, but then probably around 2006 they hired a man named Hidetaka Miyazaki to help work on Armored Core 4.
Hidetaka Miyazaki, right?
Yes, thank you. And this is kind of where things get started. From there, they go on to create a game called Demon's Souls, which wasn't as big as a hit at the time as everybody, it was well known, but it wasn't really popular. Then eventually comes in 2011, the first Dark Souls, followed by in 2014 was Dark Souls 2, 2015 was Bloodborne, 2016 Dark Souls 3, 2019 Sekiro, 2022 Elden Ring, and then they went back to the well and produced Armored Core 6. And then as of this year, they have made a DLC, which did not feel like a DLC, which felt like a brand new game.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of the timeline of From Software.
There was Demon's Souls remake, but that's technically Blue Point as well. So
yeah, that's Blue Point. It is true.
And Deracine?
Yeah, it was a VR game.
Yeah, VR mystery game that interestingly had a lot of references to Bloodborne. So I've heard. I haven't played it myself, but
yeah, it's like there's like a character in it that's basically the doll.
Yeah, the doll shows up as well as apparently a toy that seems to reference a great old one that is hinted to be the player from the third ending of Bloodborne, where you become an eldritch deity.
That is hilarious.
Spoilers, I guess, but
yeah. I guess we should just throw that up now. Is we're gonna be spoiling Demon's Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and probably some Elden Ring. So if you've never played any of these games and you don't want to know the story or some of the lore, sorry.
Yep.
We will be talking about the gameplay as well, so we're not going to try and focus too much on it. If you really want to know more about the lore, just go watch a VaatiVidya video.
Yes, like VaatiVidya is the staple.
That man puts in some work. So I guess to start things off real quick, I guess I'll talk about Kingsfield for a minute, and then we'll make our way into some of the Souls games.
Sure.
So Kingsfield was their first attempt at making a video game, period. And it was very fantasy heavy and even having now played it, I can see because Miyazaki references Kingsfield a lot when working on Demon's Souls. Including, the most staple item that has showed up in every single From Software game is the Moonlight Greatsword. And it's actually, you need it to beat the game in Kingsfield. And instead of you have your HP, you level via just attacking enemies. There is an experience system, but it is very, very hidden. So, there's even a class system that I later found out after halfway through playing the game. I noticed that my character name title was different. So it's it was wild that I didn't know. And they're just there's so many hidden things. There's even illusionary walls. There were times where I was just running around the map, just spamming the use key to try and find an illusionary wall.
Yep. What's funny is looking back, that almost seems to be an influence of Rogue.
Yeah,
Rogue had that as well.
I was gonna make that point was it's kind of hilarious and unintended that we started with streaming Rogue and how we've kind of just progressively discussed more about Rogue iterations.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's tons of elements in Kingsfield that made me think about Rogue.
Yep.
Now granted there is saving, but it's very weird. You have to kind of piece together what to do. There were items in this game that I had no idea what they did until I had to use them. I mean, granted, I could have went and looked stuff up, but I wanted the more core experience of making my way through a game.
Sure.
Before even playing it, there were tons of recommendations for people who were talking about your first time playing it, is keeping a piece of paper next to you so you can keep a map of like what the dungeon layout is like.
Interesting.
And I was like, that's really cool. And I'm glad that, like, apparently when this game first came out, like, players in Japan were doing that exact thing. So,
Very old school.
The game didn't get very good reviews at first because I imagined for your first time playing a game, it was very polarizing because it was very difficult and it was very unconventional. Kind of sounds familiar to me.
Yeah.
So, but it was a more of a word of mouth. Like, people get to talking about it and like people get interested in it and checking it out. And that's kind of what happened with Demon's Souls. So yeah, so that's a brief discussion on Kingsfield. If you're interested, you can go check out our Twitch, the twitch.tv/the instruction booklet. All of the episodes are on there. We're even on, they put up all of the episodes of the YouTube channel so you can watch it. I think it's like, I managed to get it all done in like 7 episodes. So
did Kingsfield also have something that's kind of become a staple of like the games moving forward, which is to say, like, when you die, does everything respawn?
No.
Okay.
It was really weird, but I never really figured it out. You could clear enemies and turn around and they would already be respawned. I
gotcha.
But there also wasn't an Estus system. Instead, it was more like Demon's Souls in that you ate grass.
Gotcha.
You ate like herbs. What was really funny was, and it was even the episode, fighting the last boss, I didn't have all of the spells. You get spells through learning more, and you increase certain stats by doing certain things. So, like, if you kill more enemies with magic, you level up your magic stat. If you kill more enemies with your sword, you level up your strength stat. So it was kind of neat. And at this point, FromSoft was already kind of doing the thing they're doing now with animations. I eventually learned that I could hit my sword swing, and as my sword is moving, I could move my character forward and have it hit the enemy and then pull back.
Nice.
It's really weird playing a sort of Souls game in first person.
Yeah, it sounds nauseating.
It makes me curious about some of the first person mods for Elden Ring, but I'm afraid that there's just something about having that third person perspective where you can like look around corners and stuff.
Yeah.
So
I just hope that they go all the way and they make it so that when your character dodge rolls in first person, that you actually have to watch the whole world just rotate around you.
That's very true. So yeah. So that's
for Kingsfield. Is there like an in-universe like diegetic explanation for your character dying and coming back to life, or is it just like an old school, reload at the last save?
It's more like an old school thing.
Gotcha.
So you don't reload at your last save if you die. You start back at the very beginning of the level, but you can load your previous save.
Oh, I see.
So it's sort of a one life thing. So that's kind of Kingsfield. So yeah, and a lot of time passed. They made 3 more sequels to Kingsfield. They made a lot of Armored Core games. I think there's like 15 Armored Core games. And then, so yeah, I'm before we start talking about Demon's Souls, I was going to read, I have some excerpts from this book series that I've got called Dark Souls Beyond the Grave. They have 2 volumes out, from Damien Mercieri and Sylvian Romeu. And even, Vaati did a preface for the whole thing.
Oh, cool.
So I'm going to read this from the introduction, and it's just like a couple of paragraphs. But so it says, stepping into the Souls universe is a trial in itself. These games have a reputation of being demanding and mercilessly difficult. The series' success is rooted in this challenge. Demon's Souls emerged from obscurity primarily due to word of mouth that emphasized the daunting and anachronistic challenge posed by the game. However, this quality is a double-edged sword. It draws seasoned players eager for the experience lost in the proliferation of player-friendly games, but it discourages those who fear they cannot overcome the difficulty. This feeling of fear is strong when you tackle one of the souls, and it persists throughout the game. It's the game's lifeblood. The series episodes provide no easy rewards for the impatient, the reckless, and those who not invest a minimum in the adventure. The largely incomplete tutorial is only meant to provide the foundation necessary to start out and defeat the first enemies. Players must discover the rest for themselves. They are released into the wild, so to speak, into a hostile environment where everything must be learned, explored, and assimilated. So yeah.
Reminds me of Fear and Hunger, quite frankly.
Yeah. So did you ever play Demon's Souls?
I only played it when the remake came out. I did not play it back in the day on PS3.
Okay. So I think it would be best for before we move forward is to like. So your introduction to the Souls games will be before mine, actually. So did you play Dark Souls on release?
I played Dark Souls 1, not technically on release. I played the Prepare to Die edition on PC, on Steam, which I think did not come out. I think the console version was probably out like a year or so before it came to PC. That or... I don't think it was a simultaneous release, but I know that the Prepare to Die edition had a notoriously bad port. So it took me a couple of tries to actually pick up Dark Souls and stay with it. Which is to say, I'm not sure exactly how long after release I played Dark Souls.
Okay.
But I can tell you it was after the DLC came out. The DLC was already included in the game when I played it. And it was at least a year before Dark Souls 2 came out, because I was very excited for that game.
Okay. So say for me, I played Dark Souls when the remastered came out. Because I had played the hell out of Hollow Knight. And a mutual friend of ours suggested that I play Dark Souls. And I was kind of resistant. And then when remastered came out, he bought it for me for Christmas. I was actually here and watched me play through the first little bits of it. And from that point, which would have been 2011, was when the DLC, the remastered came out. And it included the DLC. So I played in 1 year's time from December of 2011 through December of 2012. I played remastered Dark Souls 3, Dark Souls 2, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and Demon Souls in 1 year. Like, just ingested all of the Souls in a year. Like, felt pretty good about myself that I beat. Actually, no, I don't think Sekiro had come out yet. It says Sekiro came out March of 2019. Okay.
Yeah. Are you sure? I think remastered was 2018, wasn't it?
Oh, so it was 2018. Oh, so the initial... Yeah. Wait, what was this?
Because the initial release date for Dark Souls, I think,
it was
2011. Yep.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, so it was 2018 then. Sorry, my bad. So yeah, in December of 2018, I managed to beat all of the Souls games right up to when Sekiro released.
Nice.
Or the Sekiro released in the middle of all of it. No, yeah, because it was March 20th. Yeah, so I played Sekiro after I had beat Dark Souls 1, 2, 3, and Bloodborne. Then I played Sekiro, and then at the end, I realized that I had a month left, and I found a copy of Demon's Souls at a GameStop, bought it, and beat it. So it was quite the task, like just ingesting that much Souls content in a year.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And it's weird for me that Demon's Souls, out of all of the games, was the easiest.
Yeah. I think, I have my own theories as to how the difficulty of the series has progressed. I mean, I think in many ways, Demon's Souls still has some of the weirdest design of the entire franchise.
Oh, yeah.
Because, like, no other game has brought something like World Tendency back, for instance.
Yeah, World Tendency I didn't have to deal with because online servers weren't a thing on PS3.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
In 2019.
I think So as far as I understand, and maybe you know more about this than I do because you've read the books, I understand that Demon Souls was a bit of like a weird passion project that Miyazaki got to do when he was kind of just given an opportunity to make a game. And so I guess he decided, channeling Kingsfield, to make this weird, esoteric, punishing game that I remember when Demon Souls first came out. In fact, because when I was growing up, there was a moment in time where I had to make a big decision about whether or not I was going to get an Xbox 360 or a PlayStation 3. Mm-hmm. And I remember Demon Souls was a game that I kind of had on my radar. Like, I remember reading about it in Game Informer and hearing about how it was some like weird, punishing, difficult game that a lot of people felt very mid about. So I ended up getting an Xbox. But looking back, it's kind of funny because I don't know, people seemed so lukewarm on it, and now it's kind of revered as like this hidden gem.
I can see that. I remember prior to going into playing that game, just all of the weird like stories surrounding it. Like, oh, there's a boss in this game that can drain your levels, and I'm like, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah,
and
that's
then
pretty devious.
I get to a lot, and he never drained my soul once because I just wrecked him. So I have a little blurb here now that you're talking about it, like with Miyazaki. I had another little section in the book talking actually about some of his like earlier stuff that I was going to read. There's a section in this book. It's called The Father of the Series. So in 2014, Miyazaki succeeded Naitoshi Zen as president of FromSoft after the studio was purchased by Kadokawa Shoten. I'm going to be really terrible about some of these Japanese names. I'm really sorry. This is a highly significant promotion for the person who had led the company's most successful project, Dark Souls, and yet he did not lose from view from what had attracted him to the field, an insatiable creative drive. In spite of his new status within the studio, one of the conditions he requested and was granted was to remain creative director of his new project, Bloodborne. This allowed him to successfully design the spiritual successor to the first Souls game, while also assuming his new responsibilities. Giving his drive to work and create, it is not surprising how quickly Miyazaki moved up through the ranks. As a child, he lived in the city of Shizuokawa with his parents. Curious and eager for the knowledge, the young Miyazaki would check books out from the library since his parents had modest incomes and could not afford to buy them. He quickly began reading books beyond his age level, and he delighted in working out and imagining the parts he couldn't understand. He discovered game books like Sorcery series and the role-playing games Dungeons and Dragons, and developed a passion for the world of dark fantasy and the gloomy stories where knights fall prey to darkness and despair. In university, he received a degree in social sciences and was hired as an account manager for the American company Oracle Corporation. Man, that sounds shady as hell.
Yeah.
At this time, he also began to develop an interest in video games, and a friend introduced him to Ico. This game was created by Futamo Ude and was a revelation to Miyazaki and showed him the medium's potential. At 29, he began looking for a job in the field and snapped up one of the rare job offers available. It was not by chance that he soon developed an interest in FromSoft, the studio that had proved its abilities with Kingsfield and Shadow Tower series. Miyazaki was hired in 2004, and he first began work on a shooter series, Armored Core, as an event planner for The Last Raven episode, which came out in 2005 on the PlayStation 2. His dedication, determination, and abundant ideas earned him the trust of his superiors, who promoted him to director of Armored Core 4 and then Armored Core 4 Answer. It thus only took him 1 year to reach the most important role in video game creation. When the support of Takeshi Kaji, a producer with Sony, Miyazaki was able to fulfill his bold dream and direct the creation of a work infused in dark fantasy, Demon Souls. In this chapter, then it says it talks about and then from there it just kind of starts going into the Demon Soul stuff. So yeah, he kind of like jumped onto the scene and immediately got a directorship for an Armored Core game, did so well, and then was like, I want to make a dark fantasy game.
Yeah. In retrospect, it makes actually a lot of sense that he would be inspired by Ico, or Eco, or however it's pronounced. But because that's a game that is from the same people who did Shadow of the Colossus, right?
Yep. And so they did
there's a lot of
Last Guardian.
Yeah.
But
it makes sense.
Another fun tidbit I know about Miyazaki is that apparently he used to get American comic books, but he didn't speak English, so he had to figure out what was going on in his head, and so that's kind of where the idea of like putting item descriptions in world lore came from. Mm-hmm. So yeah, like I think Demon's Souls is a great entry point to the series, and it's really neat looking at it and Kingsfield from like the same perspective as in like in Kingsfield I didn't have bonfires to level up at. The game would naturally level me up. I didn't have control over my stats. And then as to where Demon's Souls kind of like it's kind of neat in the sense that it's one of the few Souls games that has hubs. Like you have a hub that takes you to non-interconnected areas. Like Boletaria doesn't connect to the stone or like the tower or any of the other ones.
Well, they definitely abandoned that for a little bit with Dark Souls 1 and then Dark Souls 2 kind of. Mm-hmm. But they do eventually, I think, with some of the later games kind of go back to that idea of a disconnected hub. I mean, Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne, and Elden Ring kind of do that. Sekiro doesn't, interestingly. But
yeah. So I guess for those that don't know, I guess like a brief summarization. Demon's Souls is, what is it? A giant fog shows up onto the land and there are demons living in it. And there's one called the Great Old One. And it falls upon the kingdom of Boletaria, and you have decided to go in and kill these demons because acquiring their souls gives you more power. I'm bastardizing the story really bad, but
that's more or less the broad strokes of it.
And so it was kind of the game that kind of introduced a lot of the stuff that we still use today. I still think one of the boldest decisions that they have in terms of like a game design is making a universal currency.
Yeah.
Like the idea of souls being tied to your ability to purchase things as well as your ability to level up and losing them on death. And if you don't recover them gone forever is such an interesting like game mechanic.
Yeah. It's persisted all the way through Elden Ring. Mm-hmm. And it has definitely been the source of major frustration on many occasions, because there is literally nothing worse than the feeling of losing like 3 level ups worth of souls or runes or blood echoes or what have you, to some nonsense.
It creates an interesting dynamic as a player, because in the early levels of like these kind of games, you're playing and you're not as like carefree. You're way more cautious, and then like you said, like if you look down and you're like, oh, I'm sitting on like 3K, I'm sitting on 3 levels worth of like I need to find a bonfire or I need to find a safe point like right now. Like you start playing really safe. You start like peering around corners and like making sure you don't get jump scared or jump killed by something. And then then you die and you're like, God damn it. So
it was especially bad back in the day because something that I think FromSoft has gotten progressively less punishing on with regard to their game design is boss runbacks.
Oh God, yeah.
Like the idea that when you fail a boss attempt, you have to cover a lot of ground to get back to that same boss in order to try them again. And, were you foolish enough perhaps to unknowingly or perhaps intentionally wander into a boss room while carrying a bunch of souls or runes or whatever and die? Well, it was not an easy matter of even getting back to the boss room.
Yeah.
Sometimes you would die on the way back and then all of your souls would be lost. And, Demon Souls has some horrific boss runbacks.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of Dirty Colossus in particular.
I'm thinking of the hero.
Oh, yeah. Old hero.
Yes. Because you have to go all the way back through those catacombs.
Yeah.
So
that's definitely one of those things where early on, FromSoft had not quite cracked the formula on how to make things challenging but fair.
Mm-hmm.
I think in Demon Souls and Dark Souls 2 kind of have this problem of, being sometimes overly frustrating just for the sake of being frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of neat, like, looking at Demon Souls, like, and it's kind of weird that I played it last, because I was able to, like, see a lot of the things that they were, like, where they learned and how they grew on that game. I still think, outside of the Soul system, the other thing that is extremely important about Souls games is animations.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they literally make or break you.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, Demon Souls was a good jumping off point for the series. But I don't think it had as major of an impact as the next game in the genre, which we would talk about, which is Dark Souls 1. So I'm curious, and I think we were kind of briefly talking about this before we recorded. How long did it take you to get through Dark Souls 1?
Yeah, it's tough to say, because Dark Souls 1, like a couple of more difficult games when I first picked it up, I think I probably picked up and failed to really understand Dark Souls 2 or 3 times before I finally stuck with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think my original playthrough, actually, I'll tell you why I played Dark Souls 1 finally for the first time. After I had tried and dropped it a couple of times, and this is going to date me a little bit in terms of, kind of what was in vogue in the media when I grew up.
Yeah.
I used to watch PewDiePie a lot when I was in middle school and high school.
Oh, man.
And I saw him beat Dark Souls 1 before I decided to finally play it.
Okay.
And I think when I watched PewDiePie play it was the moment where I kind of like, finally, I saw many parts of the game and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And that seemed like a really interesting and rewarding game to, kind of bash your head against the wall to get through.
Yeah.
But I definitely struggled a lot with the original Dark Souls. I remember getting stuck on, like some bosses that I couldn't even imagine getting stuck on today. Like the gargoyles in the bell tower.
Yep.
Quelaag, I got walled by. Capra Demon especially, I got walled by.
I will get walled by Capra Demon today.
Yeah. I had such a hard time navigating the sewers in the original, like finding the gaping maw dragon used to take me hours of just running around in the sewers, not knowing where to go. And I'm still, we've talked about this, I'm traumatized by the basilisks in the sewers in the original Dark Souls.
I have, anytime I see them in any Souls game, it is kill it with fire. Like, extreme prejudice. Basilisks are hands down the worst enemy in all Souls games. And FromSoft, if you are listening, please stop.
Yep. Miyazaki needs to be tried at The Hague for war crimes for the creation of those enemies.
I have the worst Basilisk story. I've told you this, as well as like, so my first time playing, I stumbled, like I only got a little bit of guidance on just a couple of things, and I was down. I finally got through Blighttown. Like, yes, fuck that place. And I'm wandering down there in the bottom of the swamp, and I found the tree, and I went down to the bottom of the tree, and I got cursed by a damn basilisk, and I had no way to cure it.
Yeah.
For people who don't know, in most Souls games, there are little frog creatures that are basilisks. Not like what you would think of basilisks in the like D&D sense. They're these weird little frog creatures with what looks like great big eyes, but isn't actually their eyes. And they spew this cloud that will build up a status effect called Curse. Or in Elden Ring, it's called like Death Blight. But in Dark Souls 1, if you got cursed, you die. You go back to your previous bonfire. But there's a problem, is that you are cursed, and you now have a third of your HP. And let me tell you, when I got down to the bottom of that freaking tree, and I was like, okay, I'm okay, and there was a giant Hydra waiting on me, I was like, oh my god, what have I done?
Yep. A third of your maximum HP, too.
Yeah.
Which is to say, you can't just respawn and then heal back to full. You are hard capped at 1/3 of your maximum HP until you find a way to lift the curse.
Mm-hmm. So I was trapped at the bottom of that tree without my full HP. And the only way I got out was I killed enough of those clams down there that one of them dropped a curse removal.
Yep. They're very hard to find. There's one NPC who sells them guaranteed, but she's all the way at the near the start of the game, near Firelink Shrine.
Yeah. And I didn't know that.
Yep.
And it was infuriating. And I was just like, how, what? And nowadays, like when I do it, when I've like run through that, I'll get to the part where I can unlock the tree, and I'm like, I'm not going down there. Fuck that.
Yep. Especially because that's at a point in the game where you're not likely to have fast travel yet.
Yeah, no. The minute you unlock fast travel in that game, I was like, oh, thank God.
Yep.
So
it's necessary with how sprawling the map gets at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Because Dark Souls 1, I think to this day, still has some of the most ambitious and best world design I think I've ever seen in a video game.
It's the outlier of all of the Souls games.
Yeah. I think the new Elden Ring DLC actually comes pretty close. But the original Dark Souls just has this, I mean, it's so vertical. Everything is stacked on top of each other in a very consistently surprising way, where you often find shortcuts or pathways back to places that you were at before. You know, there's very frequently just this feeling of like, oh my gosh, like I ended up back here again after finding a secret passageway.
I'll never be able to recapture the magic of playing that game the first time.
Yeah.
And just all of the like excitement and emotions that game gave me.
Yeah. Dark Souls 1 is truly special. I think it still has the most there's a certain je ne sais quoi that the original Dark Souls has. It's mysterious. It's got an aura to it that I don't think any of the games since then has really had for me. Bloodborne might come close, but
I'll say this for someone that's listening: if you've never played these games before and you are put off by them because you've heard that they're just mind-numbingly hard, this is what I tell people nowadays, because I used to be in that camp. I used to be in that camp for so long. I used to be like, I'm never going to play this game. Like, this game sounds dumb. It sounds just like it's just hard to be hard to say. But when I finally got done playing it, and people will say, like, I don't play Souls games because they're just too hard. My response is, they're not hard. They are just very punishing.
Yes.
I use this phrase a lot when I'm talking about Souls games, is you have to understand the language the game is speaking. You cannot brute force your way through a Souls game.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like, and our friend Pickens, he pointed this out to me after I finished the first game, where he was talking about like describing and like things about the games, is there's a character in Dark Souls 1. Everybody nicknamed him Onion Bro. It's Zigmire, or is it Siegfried? Zigmire. And every time you run into him, he is sitting there thinking, going, And it wasn't until he pointed out, he said, like, when you start thinking about bosses, you catch yourself doing that. You'll sit there after you've died and you're like, how did I die? Like, and you start slowing down and you start thinking about the game more in its turn. And the game does a great job of like conditioning you into thinking that way.
Yeah.
And what bosses that you thought were beyond your grasp suddenly become like small footnotes.
Yeah. I mean, I was saying before we started recording this, like, you or I could go back and play Dark Souls, and I am confident that I could beat the game in one day.
Yeah.
Probably with minimal effort. I might take a couple of tries for certain bosses like, Ornstein and Smo.
Or die on Bed of Chaos.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of have to die on Bed of Chaos, but
right.
But it's interesting because to that point about, Dark Souls games are hard. It's interesting because there definitely is a steep learning curve, but once the learning curve flattens out, the games actually become almost like relaxing for me to play.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, when you first learn to drive a car, it's like you might have trouble learning to drive the car at first. You might say driving a car is hard, but now you drive the car all the time and you don't even think about it.
Yeah. All this to say is, if you are interested, give it a try. It's gonna take some time. You're gonna bounce off of it. Shit, like Michael, you just said, like you picked up and put it down like 3 or 4 times. Like, it is a very difficult game at times, but like it's almost like a weird puzzle game at times, because it's like just learning and understanding what the game is asking of you. But yeah, talking more about like, Dark Souls 1 has like, it has like this like great, like, one of the big things that like sold me on it after a while was like, I loved the lore, which, I did my best to piece it together. And then of course I went and watched some VaatiVidya stuff and like really was like, oh my God, this is awesome. Like, one of my favorite moments I can remember of playing through Dark Souls 1 was the second time I ever played it. I did the standard ending. I, relinked the fire, because that's what I thought was the best thing to do. And I remember going back and doing it. The second time I decided I was going to do things different. And this game, like Dark Souls 1, allows you to sequence break really easy.
Yeah, it's so great for that.
I will argue that Dark Souls 1 is the most Metroidvania of all of the Souls games.
Sure.
But I went and did the Four Kings like super early. Never done that in my life. I was like, I can do this. Four Kings is like kind of an okay fight. Then after you beat Four Kings, this fucking snake guy just shows up out of nowhere, and I was like, what the hell is this? I've never seen this before. I didn't know this was a thing. So, because I never spoke to Cough.
Yeah.
So, it's just like stuff like that really like was super interesting to me.
Yeah.
And it makes me really sad that I missed it at the time that it came out, because hearing stories about people being online and just discussing how to do things in that game, like, I would have never known that you could go back to the Undead Asylum to get the ring that prevents you from slowing down in the swamp. Unless somebody hadn't told me.
Yep. And you get a rematch with the Asylum Demon.
Yeah. I think even you brought it up before the episode started about the DLC.
Yeah. It's interesting because I mean, Dark Souls 1, and to a lesser extent, Demon Souls, there's so many secrets in Dark Souls 1 to the point where, I wouldn't even be surprised if somebody discovered something new in the original Dark Souls today, that just hadn't been found.
Right.
Because every single time I go back to replay Dark Souls 1, I discover some new aspect of it that I'm like, has this been here the whole time? Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I have to imagine that kind of game design, especially for like FromSoft, the Souls series had not really demonstrated its marketability or its commercial success staying power yet to the point where they could reliably do stuff like this. And nevertheless, they decided to make Dark Souls 1 a game full of stupid amounts of secrets. Give me 1 sec. My cat is doing something weird.
That's all good.
Rumi, come on. Okay, go downstairs. Go downstairs. Sorry. I try and keep my other cat downstairs because my parents' cat does not play super nice with my cat. And he was trying to use my cat's litter box and
big no-no.
My own cats. Yeah. Anyway,
boss music starts playing, health bar shows up.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll back up a second. So FromSoft kind of just trusted, I guess, that people would be interested enough in the game that they would look around and they would look hard enough to find the secrets that they had baked into the game. Mm-hmm. And so it's very interesting because I watched a YouTube video, came out 4 months ago by this YouTube channel called Illusory Wall, which the name itself, I'm imagining, must be a reference to the Souls series and the tendency for illusory walls to show up in games. But this video was talking about how Dark Souls 1 players were expected to find the DLC in the first place. Because the DLC for Dark Souls 1, if you remember, requires a kind of esoteric sequence of events for you to do. You have to go to Darkroot Basin and kill the Hydra, which, for not being a boss, the Hydra for me was actually one of the most challenging things in the base game.
I died so many times just falling into the water.
Yeah. I remember that. I have a lot of memories of fighting the Hydra. You have to fight the Hydra in Darkroot Basin. You have to go to a hidden cove that basically has nothing in it except for this weird kind of golden crystal golem that you have to kill because he drops an NPC named Dusk, who is a sorceress, and also from a town called Ulasil, which you don't really know where it is.
You hear stories about it.
Yeah. And then you also have to go to a completely unrelated part of the world to kill another enemy that is a totally nondescript blue crystal golem. And that enemy drops a pendant that the item description mentions the town of Ulasil. And upon that, you go back to the area that you freed Dusk, and there is a portal waiting for you in the back of the cove that takes you to the DLC Artorias of the Abyss.
Yeah.
And so it's very interesting because, myself, and I'm sure, I guess, enough people were probably interested in, figuring out how people were supposed to know about this. I'm not above looking things up. When it comes to a difficult game like Dark Souls, for instance, I enjoy the games more for the technical challenges of overcoming the difficult boss fights. I have no reservations about looking up difficult secrets.
Yeah.
And so when I first played Dark Souls, I just looked up, how do I get to the DLC? But it's weird because it's like, did FromSoft just kind of expect that players would learn this on their own? And it's funny because it seems like FromSoft didn't expect them to. In fact, there's an archived web page from Software used to have their own website, and there was an official blog, official Dark Souls blog. There's a post that's only in Japanese. I had to, translate it using Google Translate from 2012, where basically FromSoft actually on their own blog uploaded instructions for the player base on how to access the DLC. But what's funny, and if you want to learn more about this, I highly recommend checking out the Illusory Wall video called How Was the Dark Souls DLC Discovered? The fan base had actually demonstrated, just from the trailer's release, when they announced that Dark Souls 1 was getting a DLC called Artorias of the Abyss, players were able to piece together from just the trailer alone and scans of the world map exactly where the portal to the DLC was going to be, even weeks before the DLC came out.
That's insane.
And so it's really funny to me because in a way, FromSoft both, I think, overestimated and underestimated how neurotic the player base would be with regard to uncovering these secrets. Yeah. And it's really kind of fostered a community such that, now in the present day we have Elden Ring. Elden Ring has some of the most ridiculously buried secrets I think I've ever seen in a video game. Yeah. And sure enough, within one day of the game being out, all of the information was basically up on a wiki already.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty insane, like how diehard Souls fans can just amass that information.
Yeah. So I really kind of appreciate that about Dark Souls 1. And I did kind of miss that phase of the game as well, because the game had kind of been solved by the time I played it.
I guess... Oh, go ahead.
Well, I will say I was in on the ground floor for Dark Souls 2.
Yeah. So before we move on to Dark Souls 2, I guess I'll give this like a brief summarization of Dark Souls 1, which I'm just going to put this out there. I love the opening cinematic of Dark Souls 1. Like, establishing the world lore is awesome. Basically, in Dark Souls 1, you find out that, like, long time ago, fire, like, there was just nothing but, like, giant trees and ancient dragons, and then fire shows up, and basically people start coming out, and they start finding cool stuff in the fire. And then they fight the dragons.
Pygmy, so easily forgotten.
Yeah, that guy. And you are much time has passed, an undetermined amount of time, or as one of the most beloved characters in Dark Souls 1, the flow of time is very convoluted. Would say you are the chosen undead. Your job is to relink the fire because it's dying, and that may or may not be a good thing. You're basically helped out by a guy named Oscar, who gives you the key to your cell, frees you from the undead asylum, which, by the way, no one can really die. Death is like a bizarre thing in this world. So yeah, that's kind of a nice little brief summarization of Dark Souls 1 without giving away too much.
There's some moral ambiguity too surrounding the decision to link the fire or let the world descend into an age of darkness.
Yeah, it's some good stuff. So yeah, Dark Souls 1 got finished, and as we mentioned earlier, Miyazaki was given an opportunity to create a new game because Sony Entertainment, who helped publish Demon's Souls, wanted to make a new game with From Software. So he went on to start another game called Project Beast, which we will get to in a minute. But he managed to help kickstart and help the early amount of production for the follow-up sequel called Dark Souls 2, which is kind of the black sheep of the family.
Yes.
I don't know. I have played through Dark Souls 2. My personal opinion is that game is really exhausting.
It is. I think that in hindsight, with looking back on the entire Souls series, it's clearly the weakest game. However, and Adam Pickens will make fun of me for this. I tend to be something of a Dark Souls 2 apologist. Mm-hmm. I want you to put yourself in a specific headspace. All right. Imagine for a moment that you are somebody who played Dark Souls 1 when it was the only Souls game other than Demon Souls. Being an Xbox player, being a PC player, I didn't have a PlayStation 3. I didn't play Demon Souls, but I played Dark Souls 1. And like many people at the time who discovered this kind of hidden, diamond of a game that would go on to influence a whole subgenre of games, I fell in love with the original Dark Souls. the original Dark Souls has tons of problems itself. I mean, the second half of the game is an unfinished, janky mess from a design perspective. Lost Izalith sucks. The Bed of Chaos is, I think, the worst boss in the franchise. The Grave of Giants sucks. There's a lot of problems with the original Dark Souls.
Yep.
So when Dark Souls 2 comes out, quite frankly, I was just excited to have more Dark Souls to play. It was a big game. There was a ton of build diversity. For me, it was just like, I didn't have Dark Souls 3 to compare it to. I didn't have Bloodborne to compare it to. I didn't have Elden Ring to compare it to. I just had the original Dark Souls to compare it to.
Right.
And so I loved it. I played the original Dark Souls. I played it 5 times, like back to back to back to back to back. And I loved it. And so I think that a lot of people tend to be more unfair on Dark Souls 2 these days because they're playing it after they've played Dark Souls 3 and after they've played Bloodborne. Mm-hmm. But really, once you get a handle on it, I think it's still a good game. My argument that I always make is it's like pizza. Even bad pizza, I think, is tasty. Like, you can get the crappiest frozen DiGiorno's or Little Caesars $5 hot and ready, and it's like, sure, right?
It's pizza.
It's pizza. I'll give me a 2-liter Diet Coke. I'll still happily destroy a frozen DiGiorno's pizza. And so Dark Souls 2, is it the weakest Souls game? Absolutely. But let me say this. If I compare Dark Souls 2 to a bunch of other RPGs that I've played, actually, I still think Dark Souls 2 is a pretty good game. The problem is just that it's the worst game in a series full of masterpieces.
Yeah. It regressed in a lot of different ways.
It did.
I mean, you think about this, like, so in Demon's Souls, like we mentioned, like when comparing it to Kingsfield, you used grass to like heal. In Dark Souls 1, they created this amazing system called Estus Flask. Healing things that replenished. You had a set number of them, and they replenished every time you sat down at a bonfire to save. Dark Souls 2 was like, hey, we're still going to do that, but we're also going to add in these little random gems that also heal you.
Yep.
One of my biggest things, and so this is coming from me, somebody who's played this game after the time period, and played it third in the series. The one thing that got me the most was the animations in that game were so stiff.
Yes. And
it bothered me like a lot.
Yep. Dark Souls 2. I now, looking back, I make the case to a lot of people that Dark Souls 2 was an early attempt at trying to be what Elden Ring ended up being. Mm-hmm. Which is to say, Dark Souls, but significantly bigger.
Very big.
And that was kind of Dark Souls 2's problem, was that there was so much content, it was very bloated. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of bosses that were mechanically quite simple, design-wise somewhat forgettable. Yep. There was a tendency to rely a lot on big dudes in armor. A lot of Dark Souls 2 enemies and bosses are just big armored knights, which in some cases works really well. I have fond memories of the Pursuer.
Yeah.
The Pursuer, by the way, who walled me for hours the first time I played Dark Souls 2. Now I could go back and probably beat him first try without even thinking about it.
Freaking furnace demon.
Yeah. But Dark Souls 2, one of the other main problems with Dark Souls 2 was that design-wise, I think FromSoft learned the wrong lessons from Dark Souls 1, which is Dark Souls 2 went out of its way to make itself frustratingly punishing.
I wish I could find the article about it, but there was an article that talked about some of the design philosophies in 2 is that the takeaways from 2 without Miyazaki at the helm was people just like hard things.
Yeah.
They even marketed the game as being hard. Like, I think 2 is even like that's when 1's Prepare to Die edition came out.
Right.
So
the marketing was, you are going to die a lot playing this game.
And I think that's probably where the stigma of like Souls probably really started.
Yeah. They made the Estus Flask significantly worse in Dark Souls 2, which is one of the reasons why I think they had to add life gems to help counterbalance that. Mm-hmm. The world design is not nearly as good in Dark Souls 2. It's not nearly as layered and leveled and intricate as Dark Souls 1 is. Though I do like many of the areas in Dark Souls 2.
Level geometry makes no sense.
Yeah.
And I think they went back to the central hub too.
Yes, and arguably, and this might just be me speaking, I think a lot of people have a soft spot for Majula as being one of the best hub areas in the series.
Had a great soundtrack.
It's got a great soundtrack. It's got the Emerald Herald. It's got just an amazing sunset and or sunrise. It's ambiguous. You're not supposed to know. I think lore-wise and aesthetically, I really kind of appreciate what Dark Souls 2 is, and I think it's a shame a lot of people skip it in favor of just going straight to 3.
It has a lot of... I like the opening cinematic, too.
Yeah.
I guess...
Dark Souls 2, I can explain the lore for this one if we're doing brief overviews. The idea of Dark Souls 2 is that the world as you discover it post Dark Souls 1 has changed drastically. However, you kind of get the sense that the choice that you had to make at the end of Dark Souls 1 was a false choice. Because the implication is that even if your chosen undead did not choose to link the fire, there would be somebody else who either killed you and took your souls or became powerful enough that they would link the fire. And as such, Dark Souls 2 presents you a world that is decaying because it is trapped in an endless cycle of death and rebirth as chosen undead after chosen undead chooses to link the fire again and again and again and again. And so I think one of the things that kind of rubs people the wrong way about Dark Souls 2's story ultimately is that it's very inconsequential. It's a repeat of the first game because by the end of Dark Souls 2, you have the same choice. And actually, let me walk that back a second. When Dark Souls 2 first came out, you didn't have a choice. You were forced to link the fire at the end of the game. And a lot of people were actually really annoyed by that because they wanted to be able to make the choice that they had from the ending of the original Dark Souls. I thought it was actually a really interesting decision because the whole point of Dark Souls 2 was actually that it's not really a choice at all. The world is kind of trapped in this endless cycle. And so it doesn't really matter if you choose to link the fire or leave, because no matter what happens, it's going to happen again.
Well, there's also like a central focus on the curse of the undead specifically.
Yes, that happens more in Scholar of the First Sin, because Scholar of the First Sin is the version of the game that introduces Aldia as a character who actually shows up more. But there's actually a lot of philosophizing that happens in Dark Souls 2, particularly as a result of Aldia kind of showing up and theorizing Gwyn's linking of the flame to humanity as kind of like an original sin, and the endless sort of like, Sisyphean linking of the fire. I really think that Dark Souls 2 gets overlooked from a lore perspective, and I actually do really have a soft spot for how, kind of absurd and almost postmodern the game is in terms of how it kind of reflects on the futility of this cycle.
Right.
But sadly, it also has many of the worst bosses in the entire series, and some of the worst sound design, and some of the worst animations, and it's frustratingly difficult, so on and so forth. Yeah, it happens. Best PvP in the franchise, though. I will go
that's
on
what I
and
hear.
say that. Yep.
That it had some of the best PvP. Yeah, so 2 had its issues, but I would say, and oh god, the DLC for 2, one of the absolute most hardest bosses out there with Fume Knight.
Yep.
Fume Knight,
Cerulean, and Ivory King all were some of the hardest bosses I think they've ever made.
Fume Knight sneezes and you die.
Yep.
So.
Also home to some of the worst the worst runbacks in the series. Specifically with Lodin Zalin, the king's pets in what is it? Crown of the Ivory King, the Frozen Wastes, or sometimes affectionately referred to as the community by Reindeer Fuckland.
Reindeer Fuckland, I like that.
Yeah, and then Blue Smelter Demon has maybe just the most absurdly difficult and sadistic run back. Oh, and Crown of the Sunken King has the Gank Squad, one of the worst bosses they've ever made.
Yep. Oh yeah, I forgot all about that one. I think it was. Is it Crown, where you go into the ruins and there's ghosts that you can't hurt?
The Sunken King, I think.
Yeah. That was my I was like, oh no.
Yeah.
Some BS right here.
Yep.
So yeah, with all of that wonderful BS aside, in Dark Souls 2, during this time period, Miyazaki was working on what I called earlier was called Project Beast, would eventually become, was it a PlayStation 4 launch title?
I think so, yeah.
Called Bloodborne. And I have a fun little brief here from the second volume of Dark Souls Beyond the Grave. And it says, it's called On the Hunt for Nightmares. In the beginning, the Bloodborne project revolved around two major concepts, exploring the unknown and fighting for one's life. At first glance, these themes could define any one of the Souls games. But the new game lent them new meaning. Miyazaki's goal was to produce more energetic battles requiring players to take more aggressive stance than in the Souls games. Equipment weight would no longer be taken into account to encourage rolling and dodging. Armor was therefore replaced with clothing. The characters became lighter and faster, but this also reinforced the player's feeling of vulnerability. The shield was also no longer played much of a role. And there's a nice little aside note here that says the description of the wooden shield makes intentions obvious. A crude wooden shield used by the masses who have arisen to join the hunt. Hunters do not normally employ shields, ineffectual against the strength of the beast. Shields are nice, but not if they're engendered passively. To make up for this lack of protection, Bloodborne introduced guns. Miyazaki explained this difficult choice in the 2015 2-4Gamer. When I thought about how we could express this idea of more active battles in the game, I thought the guns could be effective. However, I didn't want to turn the game into a shooter. I wanted the guns to show their true usefulness in close quarters combat. By allowing players to interrupt enemy attacks at the right time with a well-placed shot, and then following up with a devastating visceral counterattack, guns act as a replacement for the Souls shields by serving as a parry. The option must be used sparingly, however, due to the limited number of bullets available, which means that in spite of the guns, Bloodborne does not qualify as a shooter. Bloodborne adopts the same philosophy as other FromSoft games. Players are thrown into a hostile environment laden with formidable challenges, and triumphing over the game's abominations give players the same feeling of elation. So yeah. So, here comes Bloodborne out of nowhere. And man, did it shake up things.
Yep.
And did it influence... It was the most influential of game design for From Software from here forward. So for those that don't know, Bloodborne is set in the city of Yharnam, which has this thing called blood ministration. There's a lot of blood in a game called Bloodborne, and It is very gothic horror. There are werewolves and other things lurking around.
It turns Lovecraftian eldritch horror eventually.
Mm-hmm. And the whole plot is you're a hunter on the night of the hunt, and your job is to go out and kill monsters and figure out what's going on in Yharnam and why everybody's going crazy.
Seek pale blood to transcend the hunt.
Yep. For me, Bloodborne is the best environmental design that From Software has ever done.
I agree.
Like dripping with lore and just theme. So many great visuals. And I think this was the beginning. We've kind of like talked about this before, where it's like From Software does this thing where they go real big and then they close in, and then they go big again and then they close back in to help kind of refine themselves. So Bloodborne was their chance to kind of do that. And as I was mentioning, like they dropped equipment load. Estus flasks are gone. They're now replaced with blood vials. They're faster. You can keep 20 of them. The problem is they're a one and done. Farming blood vials suck.
I hated that. Yeah.
No longer were there a lot of weapons. Instead, and I love this design, is you had trick weapons. Weapons that served two different functions.
Yep.
I remember the first time
weapon design in the series.
I remember the first time I discovered the great sword, where it's like it's a little bitty tiny sword, and then you like clink it into the giant sheath, and then it's just a bigger sword.
Yep. I used that on my first playthrough.
Yeah. And this was the first time that From Software really started experimenting with their boss design. Prior to this, I think maybe only a handful of bosses in previous Souls games had extra phases. Ornstein and Smoke come to mind immediately.
Yep.
Manus sort of did, and Artorias did. I don't really know. I can't remember really much about Dark Souls 2 bosses. If they did,
I'm trying to think. Gosh, was there? I'll let you know if I think of one. I'm struggling to think of one.
Yeah, but pretty much every boss in Bloodborne had phases. This was also their first time in the DLC of applying adaptive AI to a boss. Looking at you, Orphan of Kos.
Yep.
And also probably like one of my favorite like themed fights with Lady Maria.
Yep. I think Bloodborne also was where FromSoft really first started experimenting with upping the pace of these games.
Mm-hmm. Rally system.
Compared to Demon Souls, Dark Souls, and Dark Souls 2, Bloodborne was fast.
Yes.
Almost too fast for the now restrictive 30 frames per second the game is locked at on PlayStation 4. Which I don't know if anybody working at FromSoft, or no, actually it's Sony's fault. I don't know if anyone working at Sony is listening to this right now. I will pay full price DLC included for it doesn't even have to be a remaster. Just give me Bloodborne on PC at 60 frames per second. I'll pay $100
I'll sign into PlayStation Network.
Yeah, I'll make a PlayStation Network account. Anyway, but Bloodborne, I think it might be H-Bomber Guy on YouTube who has a video about this, but Bloodborne I really respect because it's the Souls game that forced me to get good, as it were, as the community likes to say, because of the simple reasons that, as you kind of have already pointed out, the game dropped shields. It only has magic in a limited capacity. There are like items and like hunter relics that you can use, but they don't really form the core of a build the same way sorceries and incantations do in something like Elden Ring or older Souls games. There are guns in the game, but for the most part, guns, unless you really go out of your way to do like a gimmick build, guns do not form the backbone of the build.
Right. They're more for parrying.
Bloodborne is designed from the ground up to be a game where you play with a gun in your offhand and a weapon in your right hand, and then sometimes you two-hand the weapon. Mm-hmm. And you dodge. You have to get in there with the boss. You have to just learn how to dodge properly. You have to learn how to parry. You have to learn how to go for backstabs and charge attacks and get your viscerals. I mean, it really is a game that I think teaches you how to play the FromSoft style game masterfully in one very particular way. And I think that tends to be a way that a lot of series veterans tend to prefer the games these days. Like whenever I play Elden Ring, I usually shy away from sorceries and incantations, and I prefer to kind of just get a sword and get in there.
Yeah, Bloodborne was the game that the language that it spoke was you need to be in the boss's face at all times.
Yeah. And I love it. And I have fond memories of wanting to pull my hair out, trying for 6 hours straight to beat bosses like Ludwig the Accursed and Orphan of Kos. But by the time that you finally do beat those bosses, I guarantee you, if you could go back and watch some of your final attempts on those bosses, I mean, you'll be doing it damn near perfectly.
Mm-hmm. There's always like
everything perfectly.
That like sense of like, oh my god, I did it. Like, I think like going back to like Dark Souls 1 when I beat Artorias for the first time, I yelled so loud. I was like, oh my god, I finally beat him. And like, same way with and in Bloodborne it was strangely enough, like, so Bloodborne has a lot of great boss designs, but some of them aren't very difficult. The DLC bosses are a completely different story.
Yeah.
I think,
except for the living failures.
Yeah. I think the hardest boss in Bloodborne is still Gehrman.
Interesting.
I'm sorry, not Gehrman, but Father Gascoigne.
Oh, Gascoigne. Okay, interesting.
Because he is the have you learned to play this game boss.
Sure.
And for me, I was coming off of playing Dark Souls 3. And so my mentality was completely different. But Gascoigne is the boss that teaches you to be in their face.
Right.
Because he's not going to give up. Like, he is very aggressive. Like, if you come up on cleric base, it's like, oh, just big dumb boss, just, punch his butt. Right. But Father Gascoigne's like, he comes at you.
Right.
So
there's one way to beat Gascoigne, and that is by playing Bloodborne.
Yes. He asked the question of and I think this is where From Software started the philosophy of making these introductory bosses that are like asking those questions.
Right.
You
could find the music box to make Gascoigne easier, but he did not. I mean, the music box did not trivialize Gascoigne by any means.
It just forces him into phase 2.
Yeah.
But I loved just everything. Like, I wish I tried going. Like, I got a PlayStation 4 for Christmas this last year. It was given to me, and I was like, I'm gonna play Bloodborne, and I started playing it, and I was like, oh my god, 30 frames per second sucks so bad.
It's hard to go back to.
Again, Sony, if you're listening, we'll pay full price.
Please, Sony.
Please. Get a PlayStation Network account. It's just to play Bloodborne.
Yeah, but I think quite consistently, a lot of people still rank Bloodborne as one of their favorite FromSoft games, and I have to agree. If it's not my favorite, it's in the conversation. It's top 2, and it's probably not number 2.
Yeah, so it is a fantastic game. Which it's kind of hard to like to talk about any of the other like things about it because this is like how good it is. So from there, during this time period while Bloodborne was being made, they were also quietly working on another little game called Dark Souls 3, which is my favorite. And Dark Souls 3 is like the pinnacle. It takes all the lessons that they learned from Bloodborne and looks at the Souls formula and goes, all right, let's speed this up. This game has multi-phase bosses. A just gorgeous game. Like, there are still points in Dark Souls 3 where I will catch myself just staring at like what's going on.
Yep.
Like when you're climbing the castle and the eclipsed sun is there, I'm just like, oh my god, that's so pretty. It introduced a new system of weapon like skills where you can do like really cool things with your weapons now. The game is much faster in terms of pacing. Estus Flask have been split. you can now have Estus Flasks that restore your health and Estus Flasks that restore your FP, which allow you to cast spells or use your abilities. The story is incredibly weird, but I love it, and has absolutely some of the best DLC.
Yes, Ringed City and Ashes of Ariandel are. Well, Ashes is not as good in my opinion. It does have an amazing boss fight.
I say Sister Frida, Father Ariandel is one of my absolutely favorite fights. That fight kicks so much ass. I still to this day remember the line of when you move in from phase 2 to phase 3, just the two ashes meet. It's whoa. Brief summary for this one is pretty easy. Basically, hey, you remember that thing where we talked about lighting the fire and letting it die sometimes? Well, it turns out if we keep lighting the fire over and over and over again, the world just turns to ash. And in this game, you're playing an ashen one. So basically, you are the ashes of someone who tried to light the fire, but failed. And now you're going to hunt for the people who were supposed to light the fire, but decided to fuck off instead.
Yep.
Some of the best bosses in the series. Some of the most PTSD-inducing bosses in the series. Fucking Bonnet.
Yes. I think Dark Souls 3 achieves a feat that is perhaps unique to it in FromSoft's archive, which is to say that looking back on Dark Souls 3, I'm not sure that there are any bosses in that game that I would actively describe as being garbage.
I still hate Rotted Greatwood Tree.
Rotted Greatwood is not a great boss. It's also not the worst boss.
It's not Bed of Chaos.
It's not Bed of Chaos. And my philosophy when it comes to bad bosses is also perhaps a little bit different from a lot of people's, which is to say, I think if a boss is bad and easy, I don't really mind.
Fair.
People like to point to Covetous Demon a lot, the Jabba the Hutt guy from Dark Souls 2.
Oh, yeah.
Covetous Demon, I'm not going to pretend is a good boss. Covetous Demon might be one of the laziest bosses they've ever made. Covetous Demon is also easy, and Covetous Demon never takes me more than one attempt to beat. He's a speed bump when I play Dark Souls 2. And so as a result, I really don't mind fighting Covetous Demon that much. Likewise, Curse Rotted Greatwood. I think maybe the first time I played Dark Souls 3, I had some trouble with Greatwood. But if I ever go back now, I usually beat Curse Rotted Greatwood on my first try. Which is to say, even if it's not the greatest boss in the game, I'm usually done with it in 5 minutes. And then I get to move on.
Yeah. Also, one of the best dragon fights ever. Dark Eater Midir.
Oh. I thought you were talking about the plunging attack, Ancient Wyvern.
Oh no, Ancient,
which is also sometimes in the conversation for worst boss in Dark Souls 2.
I always forget about that boss because I don't think of it as a boss. It's more like a set piece.
Right.
But it also leads us to Nameless King. That fight's also awesome.
Yeah. And in Nameless King, I remember there was a moment in time where everyone was saying Nameless King was the hardest boss that FromSoft had ever made. Actually, they would probably be wrong because I think Orphan of Kaz was actually the hardest boss that FromSoft had ever made until Elden Ring. But
yeah. So yeah, Dark Souls 3, I don't really have a whole lot of notes on it. Just because it's such a great game. I've replayed it at least 5-6 times, just how much I enjoy it. And I know people don't like the story. People get really upset about the story, but I don't care.
Well, I think it's just like the story for Dark Souls 3 is good if you do the Lord of Hollows ending.
Yeah.
And then I think the DLC story is really good.
I love the DLC story. So. All right. So we got two more Souls games left, and then we'll probably be wrapping this up. So the next game, From Software teamed up with Activision and zoned in again to make a game called Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. And this game may not people debate whether or not it's considered an actual true Souls game or not. I think it is. I really enjoy this game a lot. So this game kind of goes back to like what we were talking about, was there's not a level system. You play as a guy named Wolf, also one of the first Souls games with a named character. You are a shinobi who was meant to protect the young emperor, and well, shit goes sideways. One of my favorite things about this game is you have a grappling hook and you get to like jump around. The verticality and the movement of that game is fantastic. It was also FromSoft really zoning in on a singular weapon. You don't get any other weapon other than your base katana. You do have a prosthetic arm that does a lot of cool things. And just overall, it's a game that really helped focus on stealth as well. And it has a posture system. The game asks you to parry every attack.
Yep.
So,
in fact, if you play it, I think it's without Kuro's Charm, which is something you can do in New Game Plus onward. Mm-hmm. You will take damage blocking.
Wow.
Like you are actively forced to learn to parry everything perfectly, because if you just block and you are not parrying everything with perfect timing, you will die.
Yeah. I'll say this. I described it to my friends like Dark Souls 1, Demon Souls, Dark Souls 2 is a game that asks you to be patient and think. You know, Bloodborne is a game that goes, get in their face and don't let up. Dark Souls 3 was, you can still take your time and think, but we also want you to be in their face. Sekiro is, do you have balls of steel to stand in front of this giant monkey with a sword and parry every single one of his attacks?
Right. Sekiro, I remember when Sekiro first came out, because, you know, every single time FromSoft releases a new game, we have to have the discussion of, should there be an easy mode?
Yep.
And Sekiro actually got surprisingly popular. There were a lot of people who didn't play any of the Souls games who I knew who picked up Sekiro as their first FromSoft game.
Yeah.
And I think it's a pretty good entry point into the series. Sekiro, if not Bloodborne, Sekiro might be one of my favorite games of the series. I think perhaps even just from a boss design perspective, I think Sekiro has the tightest boss fights and gameplay of any of the games that they've made.
Yeah.
But one of the problems with Sekiro is that Sekiro actually actively asks you to unlearn a lot of the muscle memory that you may be bringing into it from, say, Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3. Mm-hmm. Because in Sekiro, you are not really encouraged to dodge.
No.
In Sekiro, you are encouraged to parry, and even in some instances to jump. It introduces jumping, which is something that FromSoft ended up taking over into Elden Ring as well. So there's a lot of enemies that have very specific attacks that need to be responded to in specific ways, whether it be parrying, jumping, doing a special kind of counter called a Makiri counter, or even just attacking the boss to posture break them before they can get a certain attack chain off.
Right.
You're almost never supposed to sidestep or dodge roll to try and iframe through something in Sekiro. It just doesn't work most of the time. Mm-hmm. And so Sekiro, I remember when it first came out, there was some discussion of it being far and away the hardest thing that FromSoft had ever made. I think looking back, the learning curve for Sekiro might be the steepest, but it's a game that once you get the muscle memory for it and once you solve it, I think going back, I had the easiest time replaying Sekiro in my most recent playthrough of the entire series.
Yeah, same. I've replayed it at least 3 times, and that game, it still feels great though.
Yeah.
That game also has a have you learned to play the game boss in Madame Butterfly?
Yeah.
She definitely challenges your, she knowledge checks you.
Yep.
So
just don't ask me what the story is, because I could not tell you.
Yeah, it's strange, but it's just a good game.
Yeah. I think Sekiro sadly only has one boss that I would describe as being trash.
Uh-oh.
And it sucks because it's a blemish on what I would otherwise. I think Sekiro might be a perfect game, a perfect video game,
except for
were it not for headless guardian ape and the double guardian ape.
Yeah, double ape fight. Yep. I thought you were going to say Demon of Hatred, and I was like,
no. I actually happen to like Demon of Hatred.
Okay.
However, I only ever fight Demon of Hatred once I have gotten Malevolence.
Right.
Which is the ghost whistle that allows you to actually stun him a couple of times.
Okay. But also the great part about Sekiro was it was on all systems.
Yep.
So.
And I think that Ishin Sword Saint and Owl Father, or Inner Father actually specifically, are two of my favorite bosses that FromSoft has ever made.
Owl Father, adaptive freaking AI.
Yeah. Owl Father, and then Inner Father is even harder.
Yeah, because he'll do stuff to fake you out.
Yeah.
So yeah. So FromSoft, it's showing their things where they like to get really big and then they like to condense to learn a lot of stuff, because they took a lot of lessons from Sekiro, which leads us into their next game, the one that everybody knows now, Elden Ring.
And their biggest game.
Yes, biggest game ever. They called in George R.R. Martin to help write the world lore. And I didn't realize it until I was listening to another show today where someone said, all of the major named gods in this game have G, R, and M in their first letters. I was like, motherfucker.
Yeah, I remember pointing that out to Adam and him being exasperated upon realizing that it was true.
Bastard.
Yep. Godfrey, Radagon, Marika, Godric, Vernala, Melania.
Yep. So Elden Ring, by far the largest reaching, most well-known Souls game, has probably got the largest player base of any other Souls game, and is probably, to me, I don't know how you feel about it, and we might catch some shit about it, probably the most accessible Souls game.
Probably. I mean, all of the tools that it gives you. I mean, Miyazaki himself has said that he sucks at video games, but that he was able to beat Elden Ring, utilizing every single tool at his disposal.
Yes. So for those that don't know, Elden Ring, you're going to this place called Lands Between, and there was this thing called the Elden Ring, and it has been broken. And you are a Tarnished, and your job is to become the new Elden Lord and reforge the Elden Ring. There's a lot of other stuff that goes on, but I ain't getting into it.
Yeah, that's more or less. I mean,
those are
go watch a VaatiVidya.
Watch a VaatiVidya. So, Elden Ring is a really ambitious game. And in fact, I have one last thing that I think is kind of interesting. That was from the other book, talked about at the end of Dark Souls 3, that I think that will provide some better reference as to why I think about Elden Ring, because this book was written prior to Elden Ring. So it's been 8 years since the same jolt shook all layers of the industry, affecting players, journalists, designers, and even marketing teams. Today, everything can be compared to Dark Souls, be it a game, a gameplay mechanic, a developer intent, or even events that have nothing to do with video games. Almost any time a stamina bar appears or a game is not essentially lenient, the Souls games will come up. It can be pretty funny and even eye-roll inducing. Everything is Dark Souls of a genre category. Professionals even unabashedly write things like Breath of the Wild is no doubt the Dark Souls of Zelda games. Yeah. It's an absurd response to the chicken or the egg dilemma. Zelda, Castlevania, and Metroid all had great impact on Miyazaki's works. What I take away from this, however, is that there's a clear before and after Dark Souls. The series was able to grasp, assimilate, and modernize these mechanics to place them in a dark fantasy setting, awash with sadness, solitude, and despair. To paraphrase the now president of FromSoftware, players had to be thrown into a bottomless abyss so they could better evaluate the path ahead and enjoy the journey up to the surface. So I read that in that line about Breath of the Wild makes me laugh, because Breath of the Wild was the game that kind of reinvented open worlds. And Elden Ring looked at Breath of the Wild and went, that's a great idea. Let's make it better.
Basically.
So,
I think Elden Ring, like I said earlier, I think Elden Ring is kind of the perfected version of what Dark Souls 2 wanted to be, which was Dark Souls, but really big.
Yeah.
And I think one of the ways that makes it more accessible is it allows FromSoft to kind of pad the world with
Stuff.
easier content. Yeah, there's stuff to do that's not as mind-numbingly difficult. You know, like in Bloodborne, if you get walled by a boss and you know you're just kind of at a point in the story where there's nothing for you to do except beat that boss. So like Gascoigne, for instance.
Yeah.
Tough luck.
That's all you got.
If you can't beat Gascoigne, you can't continue with the game.
Yep.
Elden Ring kind of has this design philosophy of, oh, you're stuck on, I don't know, Margit the Fell Omen because you went straight to the castle. Well, if you can't beat him right now, guess what? There's an open world full of stuff. You can go in any direction, go do something else for a little bit, level up a little bit, upgrade your weapon, and come back, and maybe you'll have an easier time.
Yeah.
And so the world is full of easier stuff. You know, you go and you do side dungeons, and the bosses tend to be, you know, beatable in 1 or 2 tries if, you know, you're having trouble. And I think in many ways that is one of Elden Ring's greatest strengths, but it also inadvertently leads to a kind of one of its weaknesses as far as its design philosophy is concerned, that certain fans of the series dislike Elden Ring for.
Yeah.
You know, me personally, I kind of had a problem with this on release. My opinion has softened on it a little bit because I do think that Elden Ring is still perfectly fair in most cases, but a lot of people have pointed out that in order to compensate for the fact that Elden Ring is designed around you leveling up and making your character stronger, Elden Ring also then presents some of the hardest challenges in the entire series.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, on release, Melania, the Blade of Mikola, and the Goddess of Rot was far and away the hardest thing FromSoft had ever made. And the whole argument that a lot of people had was, well, she's that hard because she's designed around the player having access to all of these other tools, like, you know, spirit summons and ridiculous ashes of war and all of the sorceries and incantations. And on the one level, that makes sense. On another level, it's also kind of frustrating for some of us. And I'm not saying that FromSoft shouldn't have done this. There's a difference here. I like to play these games the way Bloodborne taught me to play them, which is just to have a, you know, a good old-fashioned weapon in my hand and to get in there and to dodge everything perfectly and just to beat the boss.
Right.
Elden Ring is so difficult if you try and do that for some of the bosses. Not impossible, because people have done, you know, rune level 1 no hit clears of a lot of the bosses. I myself have done a rune level 1 playthrough of Elden Ring where I did not level up a single time and I beat all of the main bosses.
Yeah, very impressive.
But you know, there are moments where I will be fighting a boss and it feels like a specific sequence of attacks, or one attack in particular, is designed to be bullshit because it's just kind of, you're designed to be hit.
Yeah.
And sometimes it feels like there's nothing you can do in a way that sometimes feels less fair than some of the previous games that FromSoft has made. But, you know, naturally, FromSoft is going to focus back in with their next game. They're going to go tighter again, like they did with Sekiro.
Yeah, and I look forward to whatever it is.
Yeah, I've just come to terms with the fact that I tend to prefer FromSoft games when they go for a more tighter, streamlined game design approach. Also because I think that allows them to make more intentionally designed challenges. Kind of like I said all the way back at the start of the episode when we were talking about Shadow Tower. I mean, when they know specifically what the player's capabilities are, they know how to make more properly balanced challenges for the player at the specific moment at that point in the game.
Yeah.
That's why Sekiro works so great. And that's why Bloodborne has this problem of, you know, if you find the boss after you've leveled up a shit ton, they're probably going to be easy and you're not going to have any trouble with them.
Yep.
But if you go to them too early, you're going to get walled for hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a weird balance. Like Elden Ring sort of perfects it at times. Another problem that like I think Elden Ring has is like regurgitating the same boss over and over again.
Yes.
If I have to see another ulcerated tree spirit again, I might throw something out a window.
Ulcerated tree spirit, Erdtree avatars.
Yeah, that stuff.
Especially when you consider that the Erdtree avatar is just a reskinned
Asylum demon
from Dark Souls 1.
Yep.
Some people have called out FromSoft for being lazy and Elden Ring for just reusing a ton of assets. But I also, it's a big game and I don't blame them for that.
Oh, yeah. That's a lot of work. And yeah, the great part is in the middle of all this, a team broke off and made Armored Core 6, which was a great game and really solid play. And I hope that they keep both franchises going. Or I hope they keep making, tight, action combat experiences like Elden Ring and Dark Souls. And I also hope that they keep making more Armored Core games because that was a lot of fun. So
seems like Miyazaki is more interested in individual IPs rather than sequels these days.
Mm-hmm. So yeah.
I'm here for.
So that's kind of a nice little fun recap of all of the Souls games. I guess as we wrap up here, I'll ask, what are your final thoughts now that we've kind of done all this, Michael?
Well, I would be remiss if we did not say something about Shadow of the Erdtree.
Okay.
Naturally, there is, again, if you're into gaming media at all, you have seen the discourse surrounding Shadow of the Erdtree being too difficult.
Bro, it's way too hard.
Yeah, it's way too hard. It's what some people are saying. And I feel like I'm going insane because I actually found the DLC to be disappointingly easy, except for the final boss, which I can't spoil because Jeremy hasn't done it yet.
I was trying real hard.
The final boss of Shadow of the Erdtree is the hardest thing that FromSoft has ever made, and it's not close. It makes Melania look like a cakewalk by comparison.
Oh my god.
So you're going to have a lot of fun with that, by the way. There are certain, naturally per Elden Ring, there are certain builds and strategies that you can employ that will make the boss easier. If you choose to do something lame, like get a great shield and just shield poke with a frost lance or something.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because you and I were just talking about before we started recording. There's the poster child for the DLC, a boss called Mesmer the Impaler. You beat him in 2 tries. I beat him in 3 tries.
Yeah, blew through
Meanwhile, I'm watching videos of people on stream taking literal hours to beat this boss that I was just like, cool boss, maybe a little easy. And so I've got a working theory right now, which is that diehard FromSoft veterans are like drug addicts. We're like junkies, and we need bigger and bigger doses to get our fix. To get our high. So we need harder and harder bosses to feel anything at all. Mm-hmm. Because when I played Bloodborne, I did the 6 hour, 8 hour. I attempted Orphan of Cause for 8 hours until I finally perfected the fight and I beat it. And so now, because I'm just good enough at these games, and because a lot of people are just good enough at these games, we know how this song and dance goes. We know how to learn a boss fight. And as a result, when they release a boss like Mesmer the Impaler, is it a hard boss? Probably. I mean, in any sense that I could possibly try and say, if there's something called objectively hard, Mesmer probably is a hard boss. But my sense of what is and isn't a hard boss has been totally destroyed by these games.
Yeah, we've learned so much about the questions that FromSoft can ask that we can recognize them when they show up.
Right. So I do think that Shadow of the Erdtree perhaps is going to have to represent a peak in terms of how FromSoft can continue to design challenge. I cannot fathom something being harder than
the last boss of
the DLC. But even as I say that, people are already uploading no hit rune level 1, no bleed, no shield clears of the boss.
Mm-hmm.
So who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe FromSoft will continue to push the envelope as far as difficulty is concerned. But I do think that, increasingly they're going to have this problem of alienating players, or, having to lean into this kind of Elden Ring style design of give players ways to cheese difficult bosses that don't rely on people being as ridiculous as I frankly recognize myself to be, because not everyone wants to spend 8 hours perfectly learning how to dodge and counterattack a boss.
Right.
So those are my thoughts. This series, I think, has changed my life for the better. That is to say, FromSoft games. But it's also made it... there are a lot of games that I used to enjoy that I think I no longer enjoy because I've gotten so used to FromSoft's level of quality.
Right.
Like, I can barely play Elder Scrolls games anymore. Skyrim just bores me because moment to moment the gameplay is so empty, and then the combat sucks.
Yeah. Don't you want to play a first-person Souls game, though?
Yeah. Only if it forces me to literally watch the world rotate around me when I roll.
Oh my god, motion warnings.
Yeah, the motion sickness would be immaculate.
Gotcha.
Those are my thoughts.
I think for me is these games were amazing, and I'm glad that I finally picked them up. They helped me better understand like game design as a whole, and gave me and I really come to appreciate the storytelling in these games. The letting the player figure it out for themselves mentality is great. Like, what we mentioned, I think I mentioned before, me and you kind of come at this from two different angles. I came from the age of playing the regular Nintendo, where it was hard because they just were porting games straight from the arcades, which was meant to eat quarters. And so I just had to learn to be really good at games because that was just the necessity of how games were at the time. And as time went on, games got easier, and then the Souls games entered, and I was like, oh my god, this is that difficulty that I've been looking for. So, but also, oh man, there's this other cool stuff. There's this amazing world lore that exists. So,
yeah.
So
it gave a sense of meaningful accomplishment, which is not to say that there weren't hard games. I mean, I grew up remembering, the heroic and legendary Halo runs that my friends and I used to do.
Yeah.
But the problem is in any game where you have variable difficulty like that, there's always going to be one difficulty that is more properly tuned than the rest because the game has been built around it.
Yeah. Agreed.
In Halo, that's, I think, heroic.
Yeah.
Because legendary is just kind of dumb. The Jackals one-shot you. I mean, but Dark Souls represented something where it was like, here's a hard game that is actually fair because it's designed to be a hard game, but it gives you the tools necessary to beat it if you are persistent and good enough. And so there's a sense of accomplishment in beating a Souls game that for me is unparalleled.
Yeah, agreed. I get a really big swelling sense of excitement. In Shadow of the Erdtree, there's a boss called the Twin Moons, and I struggled with her for a couple of days. And when I finally beat her, it was just yes, this is, I love this feeling.
Your heart is pounding, your hands are shaking. It's a high. We're junkies. That's what this is. So, and I would be remiss without mentioning the Souls' impact on gaming as a whole. From Software's impact as a whole. And I think I'll wrap up on this little last comment line that's kind of interesting that I think gives me some kind of nice hope about From Software. Is this year's been kind of ripe with a lot of problems in gaming, a lot of layoffs, a lot of people lost their jobs. Someone interviewed Miyazaki and asked his thoughts on it, and he said, as long as I'm in charge here, I want to do my best to keep the people here. So I love FromSoft; they're great.
Yeah. So yeah. Any other last comments before we wrap up our longest episode ever?
I think I've said my full. I mean, I love these games so much that I'm sure you and I could easily spend a whole episode on each game individually. And
that might be something for us to do in the future when we need to fill in episodes.
Yeah, who knows? Just random Elden Ring episode.
Yeah, random Bloodborne episode.
Yeah. So, if there was one game that we would do, it would be Bloodborne, I think.
100%. Well, all right, then.
I think I've said my fill.
Okay. Well, we'll do our little plugs and tease our next episode, and then we'll wrap this up. So, Michael, where can the folks find you?
Mackerel_prawns on Instagram.
You can watch videos of him lifting weights.
Yeah, my current deadlift PR is 390.
Awesome.
I am hoping to pull 405 before the end of the year. I can probably do it sooner than that, but I'm trying to not get too ambitious because chasing a 225 bench has humbled me. I think my pull genetics are better than my push genetics. But.
Excellent. And you can find me on Instagram at PressArtF4 for all my art stuff. I'm also on the Cajun Greatness podcast. Our recent episode should have came out. We watched the Nicolas Cage Hayden Christensen movie Outcast. It was something.
Nicolas Cage and Hayden Christensen did a movie together?
Yes.
What's that called?
It's called Outcast.
How recent? What year?
2014.
Huh.
And you can also find us, the instruction booklet. Just look at our link tree. It's linktr.ee/instruction booklet. You'll find our Twitch, our Facebook, all of our stuff. We're got videos on YouTube of us streaming. And for our next episode, as we were talking about the video game crash, we're going to be discussing Japanese game development in the 1980s. And who knows, we might stream some more games. Maybe I can convince Michael to play the Shadow Tower game on stream. Or who knows, maybe we might feature a game from our favorite designer, Kojima. And I don't know, maybe I can strong arm Michael into playing Police Knights.
Yeah. I have actually been thinking about picking up the Metal Gear collection on Steam and replaying 1, 2, and 3. So
yeah. I mean, we'll figure out something. We will definitely let y'all know. Right now, the goal's been like Tuesday, Thursdays on streams. I've been taking a break because of Shadow of the Erdtree. So,
sure.
But I know in the next few months we will definitely be streaming more because I'm getting a capture card for my Switch so I can play old Nintendo games. So yeah, all right. Also, be sure to check out the AYCH network. They've got us all on YouTube now. So yeah. So thanks for sticking with us for 2 hours. So we'll talk to y'all.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll talk to y'all next time.